This is the new 2025 Subaru Forester Hybrid, and it's boring. It's not particularly fast or exciting or cool or thrilling, and car enthusiasts hate cars like this. But for the general public, there's a lot to love about this car. Today, I'm going to review the new Forester Hybrid and show you all of its quirks and features. Before we get started, are you ready for your next cool car? Sell your enthusiast car on Cars and Bids. Trading in your car to dealers means you aren't getting market value for your car, leaving you with less cash for your next fun car. Just look at our recent sales of these cool cars compared to current trade-in value. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is the trade-in offer, and this is the Cars and Bids result. Get started now on carsandbids.com. Sell on Cars and Bids and join the best community to sell your enthusiast car. All right, time for the quirks and features of the latest Subaru Forester, and we'll start with an overview and some basics. The Forester has been on sale now for more than 25 years, and it's always been a popular compact crossover. This is a brand new, fully redesigned Forester for the 25 model year. It's the beginning of the 6th generation Forester, and it's the first time the Forester has ever had an available hybrid powertrain here in North America. You can still get the standard entry-level gasoline-powered Forester, or if you want more efficiency, you can opt for the hybrid, which is this one. Now, it makes sense that the Subaru Forester has finally gone hybrid because a lot of its rivals have too. Just within the last few years, there have been brand new hybrid versions released of the Toyota RAV4, the Honda CR-V, the Hyundai Tucson and Kia Sportage, the Mazda CX-50, and various others. The hybrid powertrain is becoming a hot commodity in the small crossover SUV segment, and so now there's a Forester Hybrid too. As for specifics, the newly redesigned Subaru Forester starts right around $31,500. But if you want to go hybrid, you gotta pay more. The Forester Hybrid starts around $36,500. Now, this is the top trim level version of the Forester Hybrid called the Forester Hybrid Touring, and it has a sticker price of around $43,500, so it's getting pretty pricey, but this is basically the most desirable and expensive Forester model you can buy. Now, as for pricing, the Forester is pretty much in line with rivals. The new Honda CR-V Hybrid is actually a little cheaper than the Forester at around $36,000 starting, but the CR-V does not come standard with all-wheel drive, and the Forester does. So if all-wheel drive is important to you, the Forester is actually a little cheaper than the CR-V. As for the details on the powertrain, it's a 2.5-liter hybrid four-cylinder that makes 194 horsepower. Now, that puts this at 14 more horsepower than the regular entry-level gas-powered Forester model, but despite that horsepower boost, it's still not fast. 0 to 60 is in the low 8-second range, which isn't exactly quick. As for rivals, back to the CR-V Hybrid, that has a similar sized engine, but about 10 more horsepower, which honestly is negligible in terms of acceleration. However, the CR-V Hybrid does have one big advantage. It's rated at 40 miles per gallon in combined city and highway driving, even with all-wheel drive, while the Forester Hybrid is only rated at 35 miles per gallon. Both figures are excellent for a small crossover SUV, but the CR-V Hybrid does have the fuel economy edge. Now, with that said, the Forester has, well, slightly better ground clearance actually, 8.7 inches compared to 8.2 for the CR-V, so a half-inch more in ground clearance, a little more capable for Subaru's active lifestyle crowd. One other note on this car's engine, yes, Subaru does still use a boxer engine design in their vehicles, or a flat four if you want to call it, a horizontally opposed four, whatever you call it. It is different from the inline four that all of this car's rivals use instead. Now, this won't matter to the vast majority of people who buy this car, but it is a little different, and that difference is noted on the hybrid badge for this car. You can see the horizontally opposed pistons are actually the edges of this badge, kind of showing the special engine design that this car uses. Most people won't notice this, but if you know what you're looking for, it's a cool little Easter egg that reminds you of the unusual flat four engine. And with that in mind, since that's our first quirk, let's talk through some of the other interesting quirks and features of the new Forester, starting with the key, which at first glance looks like a fairly normal key. You got a lock button and a trunk opener button, but I love the fact that the unlock button is the Subaru logo. If you want to unlock the car and begin your Subaru experience, you press the Subaru logo to do that, which is kind of an interesting quirk. Now, from there we move on to the exterior styling, which has certainly become more distinctive and interesting in this latest new Forester model compared to the last few. When the Forester first came out in the late 90s, it had a pretty distinctive look. It was lower and sort of more station wagony than other crossovers, but over the years, later Forester models became more generic and kind of regular. That has certainly changed for this new one. There's definitely some unusual touches outside. Probably the most noticeable is the wheel arches, which are now squared off, both front and rear, and certainly that gives this sort of a more distinctive look. I think the intent is to emphasize its capability and lifestyle off-roadiness, but whatever the reason, it certainly separates the look of the Forester from a lot of its fairly generic crossover rivals. And there are also a few other exterior touches that separate this from the generic look of some rival crossovers. Another one is the black roof, which you can see goes the entire way down the vehicle, gives this kind of a two-tone vibe, but again kind of separates it from other SUVs. You also have this rather unusual trim at the base of the doors. It's kind of like a little kick panel, but it has sort of a ridged texture to it that looks a little odd if you notice that stuff. And you can also see an unusual texture on the wheels where you have traditional spokes, but some of them have these sort of ridged lines on them that definitely give it kind of an unusual look, again, if you're sort of looking for that. Also worth noting, on the front wheel arches, on the back side, you have this little hole in the back of the wheel arch. I guess this is intended to be for aerodynamics. You'll see something similar on the new Toyota Tacoma. I'm not sure why they've done it, but again, a distinctive look that kind of helps separate this from your normal generic small crossover style. And next we move inside the new Forester, where you get in here and you quickly discover that the interior is nowhere near as distinctive as the outside of this car. Outside, some new lines designed to make it stand out, but in here, sort of your basic, dull but functional Subaru interior without too much craziness or excitement. They're just trying to make everything kind of work and be familiar and easy to use. Although, the most obvious thing you'll notice when you climb inside the new Forester is the giant center screen in the middle of the dashboard. So let's start our interior tour right there. First and foremost, yes, this screen does integrate basically all of your previous center control stack functions, but the integration is pretty decent. The climate controls, for example, they're at the bottom and they're always fixed in place down there, meaning whatever menu you're on the top, the navigation, the radio, the climate controls will always stay in the place where you expect them. And using the climate controls is pretty easy. For instance, the heated seats, you just tap here and it turns them on, tap again to lower or raise the amount of heated seat. That's different from some cars' integrated climate controls where you tap the heated seat and then a slider appears and you got to do a multi-step process. Here it functions almost exactly like a button. Plus, the other nice benefit of the climate controls is that you do still have physical buttons for some of your most important items. Like, for instance, your temperature control. You can see here driver and passenger side, still physical buttons on the side of the screen, and your front windshield defogger, defroster, and the rear window defroster, you still have physical buttons for those things too, which is nice to see. Now, on the subject of physical buttons, it's also worth pointing out you do still have physical buttons for the volume control. You have a knob on the left side of the big screen, and for the radio tuner, which you can see is over on the right side of the big screen. Again, pretty frequently used stuff, so it's nice to have physical buttons there instead of using the screen, and that's great. And it goes one step further. You also have a physical button to pull up your camera system, which is great. Here in the center console, you press this button marked View next to the parking brake, and it pulls up your camera system so that if you're trying to maneuver into a small parking spot, you don't have to go into some menu to find the camera. Just press that. It's right there, and it can make it easier to park. And that is a pretty cool feature. But aside from those physical buttons, yes, the rest of this screen is all of your previous controls. However, it's fairly easy to use. It's a big screen, and so fonts are large, and it's relatively intuitive and responsive to your touch. And it works fairly simply. You got your apps, you got your home screen. It's all a pretty simple and easy operation. Now, with that said, I have noticed that when you first turn on the car, like after it's been sitting overnight or even just a few hours, the screen can be surprisingly slow to respond for the first minute or two. But other than that, it's a fairly usable, easy screen. And I really like the fact that integrated on the top part of the screen, there's this little sort of swiping menu that you can use to display like what you're currently listening to, or the weather in your area, or various other pieces of information that's configurable depending on what it is you want to see. That's pretty nice to have up there. Also worth pointing out that this infotainment screen, like in previous Subaru models, allows you to enter birthdays and anniversaries, so the car will remind you of those special days when you first turn it on in the morning. You can put in your birthdays here, and then you have them and you'll get reminded, and then if you forget, well, at least when you're driving to work in the morning, it pops up and reminds you what's going on. It's an unusual quirk unique to Subaru, but they're still doing it even in 2025. Now, with that said, there is one drawback to the screen, aside from the slowness to respond when the car is first being turned on. That would be, I wish you could do two things at once. So a lot of cars with screens this large will let you show, like for instance, your navigation map on half the screen and your radio on the other half, or your phone contacts on one half and your radio on the other half, or vehicle settings and phone contact, whatever you want. But here you really have to choose only one thing at a time, which is odd considering just how large this screen is. And in fact, despite its large size, when you think about the climate controls taking up space on the bottom and that swiping menu on the top, which is useful, the rest of the screen is not really that massive for displaying stuff, so you really only do get to pick one thing at once. This won't be a huge deal to most people driving this car, and primarily they'll be using CarPlay or Android Auto anyway, but it's still worth pointing out. Regardless, this screen pretty good despite its massive size and the fact that I think it would be a shock to some of the more conservative, kind of traditional Subaru buyers. It does work fairly well. Unfortunately, the gauge cluster screen I don't really like quite as much. You can see it here, full color, high resolution, nice screen, but it's very, very minorly configurable. The only thing you can really change on this gauge screen is the tiny little display in the lower left. You can adjust it to show like your tire pressure, the music you're listening to, navigation details, that kind of thing, but that's it. The rest of this screen cannot be adjusted, which to me makes absolutely no sense. You have this gauge screen, you want to see like the music, the navigation, whatever you want in there, you can't really do that. So why make it a screen at all? Why not have physical fixed controls? I don't really understand it. And that's especially true of the dial on the left, which shows like your current hybrid power usage. Not everybody wants to see that or even cares about it, but they make that go on there and you can't change it. It's surprisingly non-configurable. But anyway, aside from the screens in this car, some other interesting quirks in here. For one, I like the switch between sport mode and I for, I guess, intelligent mode on the steering wheel. You can see S and I. I like that when you switch, it appears briefly in the gauge cluster showing a power curve. The sport mode curve is like higher earlier because you're going to be accelerating more, and the I curve is sort of more linear and smooth, which is kind of an interesting way to represent them. Another interesting quirk, speaking of screens, is the rear view mirror. You can see right now it's a mirror, but if you flip this switch, it becomes a camera showing a screen, which is great. More and more automakers are adopting these rear view camera screens, which really add to safety, especially when you have people sitting in the car that would otherwise obstruct your mirror view. This is a fantastic feature, and I'm thrilled that Subaru has adopted it for this car. It's great to see. Another interesting quirk in here, on the dashboard, you can see this rather unusual trim over on the passenger side with this kind of strange texture sort of surrounded by steel stitching. It's a little odd, but I guess it's Subaru's attempt to inject a little bit of personality and character into this otherwise, again, pretty functional interior that's relatively lacking in weird quirks. However, that is not the most unusual texture in here. That honor goes to the base of the door panel where you can see what looks like sort of a topographical map. It's like a relief map, and on it, if you look very, very closely, you can see a pair of boot prints, because Subaru's supposed to be all about active lifestyle, getting out into the wilderness and hiking. So this topo map and the boot prints are supposed to remind you that that's what you should be doing with your capable Subaru. Other items worth pointing out in here, to the left of the steering wheel, you have a button to push to go into EV mode. Now, this is a regular gas-powered hybrid vehicle. It's not a plug-in hybrid, so it doesn't have like a full EV mode, strictly speaking, but you can use this for short distances and low speeds if you want to kind of creep somewhere without making a sound under certain circumstances. You can go into your EV mode. Now, speaking of unusual controls in this car, to the right of the steering wheel, Subaru is still using, after all these years, its wildly large trip reset button. Other cars have this integrated in a tiny little control on the side of the gauge cluster, but here it's a big button the size of a quarter for all those times you have to reset your trip odometer, which most people don't really do all that often. Nonetheless, you have a dedicated button. Another interesting thing that is unusually large in this car is the sunroof. This car doesn't have a panoramic sunroof, but the sunroof covers basically the entire front and about half of the back seats. The weird part is that the sunshade is manually operated. It's not power, but it's very difficult to reach all the way back to open or close the sunshade because the sunroof is so big. Definitely the largest sunroof with a manual sunshade I have ever seen. Meanwhile, the opposite end of the spectrum, when you open up the door and look at the door sill, you have a very small Subaru script there. It's incredibly tiny, almost not even noticeable. I don't know why they bothered to add it, but they did. A very tiny little Subaru to remind you what you're getting in if you look very closely. But anyway, next we climb into the back of the new Forester, and when you open the door, once again, you find the topo relief map on the inside of the door panel, although this time, if you look closely at the graphic printed within the map, it's paw prints instead of boot prints. So you got boot prints up front and paw prints in back, which is a nice little hidden Easter egg that's kind of cool to find. More interestingly, though, than this texture is the one you'll find on the inside of the door panel. You can see it here, a bunch of different lines going in different directions. I don't know why they've done this. It looks a little bit odd, but it's there. And if you look closely here, you will find a couple of stars specifically intended to look like the stars in the Subaru logo. Now, you don't have the whole logo here, just a couple of the Subaru logo stars, but it's here when you get into the back seat. Anyway, climb into the back, and the first thing you'll notice back here, it's shockingly roomy in the back of this car. I am surprised just how much space I have for hips and legs and knees and head as a tall adult in the back of what was a compact crossover. It definitely doesn't feel compact in back. There's shockingly decent passenger room back here. And that even goes for the middle passenger, where you usually have a large hump in the floor that makes it hard for the middle passenger to get their feet in. Here, the hump is fairly small, despite the fact that you have a drive line going down the center of the car. Middle passenger could be seated here pretty comfortably, which is nice to see. Other interesting items worth pointing out in the back. For one, you got heated rear seats, at least on this trim level, which adds to the comfort back here. You also have two USB ports for charging, although strangely, one of them is USB-A, which I almost never see in brand new cars anymore. I guess Subaru figures their buyers are more conservative, traditional, likely to still have some USB-A devices, so they've kept those ports in the car. That's also true up front. Thankfully, both front and back, you do have a USB-C as well, so you have both options, but it's interesting to still see USB-A in a brand new car. Also worth pointing out back here, you have climate control vents for the rear, which you don't always get in a compact crossover, so it's nice to see that here, again, to add a little comfort in back. And worth pointing out, the cup holders back here. If you drop the center seat back, you will see an armrest with cup holders included, and that's nice to have, but it means that you don't have a place place for cups when someone is sitting in the middle seat, except that the door panels are actually molded to take a cup or a water bottle as well. So you do have extra cup holders in the door panels. You don't just have to rely on that center seat back, and that means you can have cups in here even with 3 people across and back, which is a nice practical touch. And finally, we move on to the cargo area. You open up the power tailgate, and the first thing you notice is that this scuff plate for the tailgate has a mountain graphic on it, which is nice to see. Again, you're reminded of the off-road capable lifestyle you could have with your Subaru. You look further inside and you'll notice another one of those topographic relief maps, and this time the little graphic that's printed on the map is a telescope, which is again kind of a cool little quirky Easter egg. You got the boots up front, the paw prints in back, the telescope in the cargo area. I guess that's where all of your stuff is supposed to go. People, dogs, equipment, which is kind of cool. Now, despite the mountain graphic and the telescope kind of emphasizing the lifestyle capabilities of this vehicle, I'm actually a little bit disappointed in this cargo area. Not in terms of overall space, because it's pretty good size for this vehicle size, class, and segment. It's pretty much exactly what you'd want, but it's missing a few things that would add some extra practicality for your off-roader kind of camper type people. One good example is there's no household power outlet in here. You do have a 12-volt cigarette lighter style power outlet, but in terms of charging your other devices that use household power, you don't have that. And you do in a lot of other small crossovers and other vehicles. Unfortunately, no household power outlet at all in the new Forester, which is disappointing to see. Beyond that, I'm also a little disappointed that there's no special cargo area for smaller fragile items. You don't have a net off to one side where you can stick stuff, or a little separated bin for smaller items. You don't even have extra storage under the cargo area. You lift it up, and this is mostly taken up probably by the hybrid system and some other assorted mechanical bits, but there's no extra storage beyond what you see here, which again would add to the practicality. Now, with that said, I do like 2 useful features back here. One, this little switch looks like a power window, but actually it drops the rear seat. So on the left side, you pull it, it drops the left rear seat, and on the other side, of course, it drops the other seat, and that makes it easy to obviously drop the seats down so you can stick a larger item in back here without having to go around to the seats and unlatch them manually one by one. That's pretty nice. I also like the tailgate light situation here. You can see on the inside of the tailgate, you have a little light, and you can turn it off or set it to turn on when the door is open. Now, a lot of cars with tailgate lights, they're automatically on when the tailgate is up, but that can drain your battery, which can be annoying if you're camping, if you're intending to leave the tailgate up for a long period of time. And so here you actually have the ability to turn it off if you want with a very easy, useful switch, which is nice to see. Also worth pointing out, on the inside of the tailgate, you have another one of those topo relief maps. This one, of course, says Subaru on it in large print, and printed in the corner, there's a little compass. Again, an extra little Easter egg graphic. And speaking of little Easter egg graphics, you can see at the base of the rear window, there's a mountain. A little tiny thing you probably won't ever notice, but it's there, just added into this car to remind you of what you can do with your Subaru. And there's one other window-mounted Easter egg. On the windshield up front, at the very corner on the passenger side, there's a little bird, which I guess is an example of what you can see if you take your Forester into the wilderness. But all of that stuff out of the way, I'm curious how the new Subaru Forester Hybrid drives. So let's get it out on the road and find out. All right, driving the Forester Hybrid. And again, as I've pointed out throughout this car is pretty dull. 0 to 60 is slow by basically all measures. None of these compact crossover hybrids are particularly fast, but they're not intended to be. And the thing that I like about this car when I get in, it's a pretty anonymous and basic car, but it can just so easily do the job that most people require of vehicles like this, which is to just sort of exist and take them about their daily lives. That's what this car is good at. I get in this car and I feel like it feels sturdy, and I feel like it feels competent, and I feel like it's just good and well made and well put together, and you get good fuel economy while doing it. And I showed you the interior interior is good, the tech is decent. Like, the drawbacks of this car are that it is not fun, fast, exciting, doesn't handle well, like all that stuff. But I have a suspicion that 99% of people looking for a hybrid crossover really don't care about any of that, and just want like a sturdy, reliable car, point A to point B, like does the job. And that's exactly what this car is in a very competent way. This is definitely not an enthusiast car, but I get in here and I like the fact that it feels anonymous and long lasting. And it's the car for people who just, they're not all that into cars, but they want to have like a vehicle that does what it does and does what they need from it. And again, that is precisely what this is. And if you look at it through that lens, it's actually pretty hard to find fault with this car. Enthusiasts are going to watch this and be like, a hybrid, it's slow, 0 to 60 in 8 seconds, you know, etc. But for the people who buy this, this is what you're looking for. And so with those people in mind, let's kind of talk about what those people tend to like. Driving position is one of them, and visibility. Good visibility. You're sitting up high, you have a lot of windows all around, which I think people, especially kind of the older crowd, kind of prefers to rely on windows for visibility than driver aids and things like that. And I think that a lot of Subaru buyers kind of tend to be sort of the older, I want a long-lasting car kind of crowd. And so this car does have good high seating and good window visibility. In terms of noise and quietness, because of the type of transmission this car uses, which is called a CVT, when it is accelerating, it can be a little loud. Like, you can hear a little bit more engine noise than you might want, and it can be a little louder than you might expect. I'm actually kind of surprised by how relatively muted the road noise is and the tire noise. You don't actually hear all that much when you're driving along, but you do hear that powertrain, especially when you're under pretty decent strain, like when you're accelerating up a highway on-ramp or away from an intersection. You hear maybe a little bit more than you might want. One thing I will say, I'm not obsessed with the quality of the materials in this car, given the price points. It's a little bit cheaper than you might want it to be. It is durable materials, which is kind of nice. Like the hard plastic they use feels and looks like it's going to last forever, and I think that's actually pretty important to a lot of people who buy these. But certainly it's not luxurious, and when you're creeping into the mid $40,000 range, these start at 36 and that's fine, but in the mid 40 to 50, in that $45,000 to $50,000 price range, which is about where this car is starting to get, it's not quite as nice to have some of this stuff in here. You're hoping for maybe a little bit better. Again, I think that the people buying this car aren't necessarily after that. They're after a durable, long-lasting car. But at the price point, you do start to think, hey, maybe I want something a little bit nicer, because there are more options available to you. In terms of acceleration, I've already pointed out several times, it's not enthusiast level fast, but it is totally acceptable for regular people. I can very much see people kind of going the Subaru route over rivals for a lot of reasons, and I think that's totally reasonable. I think this car is very class competitive, very much on the level of CR-V RAV4, and I would absolutely cross-shop it with those cars and very much consider all of these vehicles tightly together when making a decision about a crossover. The good news is they're all great, and that very much includes the Forester Hybrid. And so that's the new 2025 Subaru Forester Hybrid. I wouldn't buy this car because I like to have some fun on the road, but if that's not you, there's a lot to love about this car. It's a simple, sturdy crossover SUV that's practical, efficient, and safe. There's a lot of great stuff about the new Forester, and especially the new Forester Hybrid. And now it's time to give this car a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 46 out of 100, which puts the Forester Hybrid here against the competition. It actually ranks well, beating or tying all of its closest rivals like the Mazda CX-50 Hybrid and the Ford Escape Hybrid, though it falls behind more exciting cars like the Mazda CX-50 Turbo and the Ford Bronco Sport, which makes sense as the DougScore is intended to be a bit biased towards fun cars, and the Forester Hybrid isn't fun. But it is desirable, practical, efficient, capable, and it should be highly appealing to a lot of small SUV buyers.